Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Punching Left. My name is AJ Wilms, and this is Mike Lauber, my wonderful co-host. And we have a very big news day. Mike, why don't you start us off with some of the craziness that's happening in the world?
Yeah, we're going to be all over the place. We're going to cover a lot of stories you've seen us talk about before, but it seems like several things are coming to a head today. So we'll go ahead and get things kicked off here real quick. Let me pull up our menu here and oh, maybe there we go. So I'm sure most of you saw that yesterday we passed a bill for another $40 billion in spending for Ukraine. This is in addition to the two previous large bills that they've passed and several small ones that I guess totaled about $3 billion.
Wow, that's insane. And more and more and more money we're just dumping into Ukraine. Meanwhile, we have so many problems, of course, in the US that really we could use even less money to figure out our issues, like $4 billion for a border wall. And now we're
Yeah.
giving $40 billion to Ukraine for their border.
Yeah, so like even if you want to take the original higher estimate for the border wall, the $8 billion for completion, we could have gotten five out of it. At the
Yeah.
4.5, which is what they reduced it to after renegotiating material supply and changing part of the design for the slat fence that you see, that you typically see them installing,
Yeah.
4.5 billion. So nine times we could have paid for nine border walls with this.
And it's like almost bipartisan support for this too. You can see at the top right, it's 368 votes in favor of this $40 billion for Ukraine aid, and then only 57 votes against. And of course, the 57 did come from the Republicans, but I don't know because there's still how many hundreds of Republicans? 150, 149 Republicans who voted yes on this in the House of Representatives.
It's sad and pathetic.
Yeah.
Again, like we can't count on these people for anything. Even the ones that did speak out, instead they were, called names and castigated. Marjorie Taylor Greene mentioned we're going to spend this on the Ukraine, but we've got a crisis here, and nobody can get baby formula, and somebody came to the floor and said that this was propaganda. Jamie Raskin said this. She was reciting Russian propaganda.
Wow, there it is again. There's that line of, oh, it's just Russian propaganda. Oh, it's straight from the Kremlin. And you're going to hear this more and more in the future because this is what leftists are starting to label everything they don't like. Before it was like everything is racist, and now it's everything is Russian propaganda. Because I guess that's just like the new hot button issue right now. It's no longer BLM. Now it's Russia and Putin. And so now everything you say that they don't like is no longer racist or homophobic or whatever. Now it's Kremlin propaganda. It's Russian propaganda. That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And this is actually the first night in a while where we're not going to have a story directly about our new Minister of Truth, Nina Jankowicz.
Yeah.
But that's the game they're going to play. Is they will cast the story off as Russian propaganda. Their lapdogs in the media will just repeat that. Anybody that says otherwise will be thrown off social media. I'm sure Facebook and other, Twitter, they're going to point to this Ministry of Truth, and whatever they say goes. So if you go against that narrative, they will punish you on social media for it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's going to happen more and more
Oh
as
yeah.
things heat up, especially towards the election. Things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. And in fact, I don't know when things will get better, but I think it's a very, very long ways away.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. Since everything's trending down, we've got something to illustrate that coming up in a few more slides. But this is just the start. So yeah, we just flushed another 40 billion down the toilet to Ukraine. Again, this is on top of, I think we're over 20 billion in spending now, right? Because the last one was 13 point something.
Yeah, I believe it was $13.6 billion was the
Yeah,
first one, and then they've done obviously this 40 billion. I mean, it's insane how much money they've shoveled into Ukraine here.
yeah.
And we've discussed this before. It's like it's all for what? Like, is this going to turn the tides of the war against Russia? In which case, this would be like an act of war. It'd be like if we were at war with Mexico and China gave them all this money that they could start winning against the war that they're fighting with us. Or is this just like symbolic and pointless? In which case, I would say, well, if the money's not going to stop anything that's happening anyways, why don't we use the money to actually make tangible good results here in America? Because a lot of American people sure need the money more than the Ukrainian people do.
Yeah, and like this is the thing. So like 40 billion is more than the yearly upkeep that Russia spends on their military.
Whoa.
Not to mention, um, so we're actually depleting a lot of weapons that we would normally have in reserve in case we needed them right now. Certain types of missiles and other small arms. We've actually
Wow.
depleted our stockpile because the manufacturers obviously they need time to spin up to make this stuff. So even though a portion of this money is going to go to that to refill our stockpile, we are now out of or near out of certain weapons and items that we would normally utilize if there was some sort of a real need for an emergency invasion somewhere. Another grenade pops up or something like that.
Right, and how many times has this happened where we go against our own national interests to help out some other country for their national interest, especially when you think of foreign policy and our military. Like when's the last time the US military has really fought a war for like self-preservation as if we didn't get involved in the war, America would be doomed and over with. I mean, there hasn't been an invasion on American soil in a very long time, and of course that would be justified grounds for attacking back, but so many of these wars, especially in the Middle East, really serves no interest to like your average American citizen, and their life is not in danger if we don't invade X, Y, or Z country out in some big sandbox.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of the times these things can be handled with drone strikes or simple, precision actions, as Trump demonstrated several times. You lure Soleimani onto an airport and you drone the guy. There's little to no collateral damage. You take out the target and you send a message. We did the same thing with other terrorist leaders. We don't necessarily need a ground invasion. If we need to actually go get somebody and drag them out for information, you send the special forces.
Yeah, and it's like how many more times are we going to be getting involved in other countries, whether it's the Middle East or now Eastern Europe?
Yeah.
And it again, we have so many issues domestically, and the fall of America is certainly going to be something that comes internally and not externally. When America falls, it's not going to be because we get invaded by like Canada or Mexico or China or Russia even. We're not going to get nuked off the face of the earth by one of these countries. It's going to be a domestic issue, and we're already seeing all of this happening. And in fact, if you read like USSR propaganda and like USSR tactical planning and such against the U.S., that's what they said. They're like, we're just going to go within the U.S. We're going to like infiltrate the universities. We're going to go into the media. We're going to use these institutions to subvert America and make it fall from within because they didn't want to go into a war where it's like shot for shot. They knew they either couldn't win or it would result in mass casualties for them that they couldn't afford. So of course you're going to take the safer option and go, sneaky from behind the scenes and try to make it collapse from within.
Yeah, it's much much easier to kill us with cancer than it is for a direct assault. I mean, our military is extremely capable. I'm sure if there was a land invasion here, at the very least, the foreign opponent would be taking just horrendous, horrendous casualties, and that's if it
Right.
didn't turn nuclear, or we
Mm-hmm.
didn't just turn to, large-scale weapons that we have that most nations don't have access to, and just
Yeah.
wipe them off the map.
Well, yeah, it's like if you wanted to take out Mike Tyson, are you going to challenge him to a boxing match? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
America has like the largest military in like all of history. I don't think that it's like if anyone wanted to destroy America, I don't think they're like, okay, let's declare war on them. That's going to work. I
yeah,
mean, people are smarter than that, especially people in foreign governments. And we can't just underestimate our enemies and think like, oh, well, they're just going to fight us man to man like this, and that's how America's going to fall if it does. No, America's going to fall domestically. And maybe there's foreign influence involved in that, but I think a lot of it is even domestic influence. You have people like George Soros, people like Bill Gates, these other individuals who live within America, who I don't even really consider American, but they live in America and they're funding these groups that are for the destruction of America.
yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, that's the same story we hear over and over again, where a lot of these billionaire leftists are the ones behind the scenes that are funding a lot of this, or
Yeah.
this it's propaganda that's come over from the Soviets back in the day, or now it's the Chinese or whoever else infiltrating our institutions, paying for um, colleges, basically buying off professors and departments and everything else, or buying their way into corporations. Everybody's seen Nike and the NBA go
Right.
woke to appease China.
Yeah.
Um, to tie
And
this,
that's the thing.
oh, sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go on.
No, no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, this is a very important point too that we can't really rely on companies to save us from all of these issues as well, because I mean, you kind of run into this problem where China is like, okay, as like the government of China, we have more money than like your average consumer in America, obviously, and even all these consumers put together. If you look at like people who buy Nike clothes versus like the entire Chinese economy, you can kind of see that if one was put against the other and Nike had to choose between one or the other, they're probably going to go towards like the Chinese market, or they're going to go to appease the Chinese. I mean, this happens with the NBA all the time, and with other, like John Cena with Hollywood, this is big. John Cena had to apologize to China because it turns out that like China as a government has decided we want to have cultural influence within our own country and apparently other countries as well. So they coerce companies to do what they want. In America, we think this is a great evil and terrible and awful. And yeah, when it's being used against us, it is. But it kind of outlines the point that like we can't just trust companies blindly to get us out of these problems, because they are not beholden to our government to do what is in our nation's best interest. They're beholden to other countries' governments who will go out and say, yeah, we'll put our foot down and say you're not allowed to do X, Y, or Z, and if you do, we're not going to support you in any way.
Yeah, and even though U.S. corporations have this loyalty to China and they will change things and do things to cater to that market, China doesn't reciprocate. I mean, recently we covered that story with Disney where they're not letting them show, what was it, the Doctor Strange movie or some new Marvel movie because
Right.
some gay whatever scene that's in it, and they don't want that in their country.
Yep.
Um, so it's not a two-way street. It's
Yeah,
you go
exactly.
their way or the highway. That's it.
Yeah, and I think, and I believe that example was with the Middle East, but China's done this many other times. You're right, like with other movies. I mean, for example, there was a very famous case with like the Star Wars movie that came out where
Yeah,
they
yeah.
photoshopped like Finn, the black character, off because they were like, it's not going to look good for the Chinese audience. So it's really funny if you look at the two posters, the American one and the Chinese one, they're identical except like you have the main character, like the main character photoshopped off the poster because he's black, and they were like, oh, that might not look good to the Chinese market.
Yeah, it's definitely going to stir some stuff over here when they find out. So to tie this back together with Marjorie Taylor Greene's, just shortly after she made her floor speech pointing out the formula shortage, well, we found out where the formula is going. It's going to the border. We're
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're shipping pallets and pallets and pallets of baby formula down to the border to deal with everybody coming up illegally from Mexico and South America and wherever
Wow.
else, bypassing hungry infants here to help
Yeah,
the
that's the
illegal
thing.
aliens hopping over
It's
our border.
it's all the time, every single time Congress is faced with like an issue within America. Oh, we're running out of baby formula for like American babies, like American citizens' children, people who pay tax and like built this
Yeah.
country. That you can honestly 100% of the time rely on the fact that Congress will look at that and say, let's just rub salt in the wound. Let's just take whatever baby formula is left and send it to the border to help non-American people. And it's the same thing with Ukraine, where they're like, oh, American people, wow, inflation's killing families right now. It's hard to put food on the table for so many families. Let's give $40 billion to the Ukraine. And it's like, why every single time you guys are faced with an issue in America, you decide to do the exact opposite and help out any other country than the US?
Yeah, exactly. And I used to think that we went from America first to America last was just like a campaign slogan, but apparently that was more a preview of the coming attractions.
Yeah, the Democrats and even a lot of Republicans apparently really internalized that and thought that was just an awesome, message that they
Yeah,
really wanted to be beholden to.
yeah, apparently, yeah, that's the strategy rolling forward. Well, believe it or not, it actually gets worse than this. So, right before we went on air, we found out that this whole shortage was caused by the FDA. Biden shut down the largest factory that produces formula. Now, as
Wow.
of today, they are finally reversing that and allowing them to open back up and begin producing products again. But I don't know what the spin up time is on that. I mean, that could be weeks. If you have a food production plant closed down, you're governed by multiple agencies. There's all kinds of different rules that you have to follow for cleanliness, how often things are pulled apart and sanitized. Plus, you have to get materials and products in there, bottles, and staff. So
Yeah.
it's not like this is going to fix it tomorrow. Um,
Right, right,
yeah,
exactly. And how sad is it too that like, I'm not familiar as much with like how much of a necessity baby formula is. From my understanding, it is like necessary for some kids because like if mothers can't breastfeed, they have to go to formula.
yeah.
And I don't know, can you give your baby water or something if not breast milk? I don't know how that works. I'm not a girl, but I would assume baby formula is like a very important thing for a child to have. And the fact that we're running out, it's like, what are the health implications of this for all these young, little babies in our country? It's going to be interesting seeing what happens. And it's crazy to think that like they prioritize, bypassing all these regulations in the FDA to push through the COVID vaccines. And by the way, I don't even think that any of the COVID vaccines, or maybe just one of them, is actually FDA approved.
Yeah,
I
and you
think
can't
Johnson John.
and you
Go ahead.
can't actually get the one that's approved, the Community or whatever. It has a strange name. It kind of sounds like community.
Yeah.
I think it is Community. That's the approved one, but you can't get it anywhere.
Right. And I mean, that's the thing that's so frustrating is like with the vaccines, they rushed through and like made all these vaccines available to everyone, even though none of them were FDA approved at the time. Now, and then they did approve one and then they revoked the approval. So, I mean, I don't even know if any are still approved. But in any case, you could still get your vaccine like no problem since like, well, over a year now you've been able to. And now when it comes to baby formula, something that it's like an actual necessity, it's not just oh, just quarantine a little longer, or wear a mask, or social distance, or just get it. Who cares? Like the dumb virus.
Yeah.
Instead of just, these things you could do, but with baby formula, it's like what you're going to tell a baby? Oh, just sit tight for a few months for the FDA to go through all of this.
Yeah, time to lose that baby fat.
Yeah.
So it actually, there's even another layer to this. It's even, I don't know, scarier, I guess, with the whole formula thing. So they are tomorrow, it might be, yeah, tomorrow, having a press conference about this with no press. They're having a meeting. So I've seen it written up two ways, and the first one may have just been somebody not thinking, calling it a press conference and shooting a title out there.
Yeah.
But I guess they're having some sort of meeting with the administration, but they're not inviting any media to it to discuss this shortage and how they can fix it like quick, because this is obviously, I mean, this has just been blow after blow after blow for the Democrats for the last several months now.
Right. Well, that's interesting, and it wouldn't surprise me if they don't want any media there because of just like the constant blunders that are happening here.
Well,
And how are they going to respond to all of this?
I don't know. That's what makes me think if you don't want the press there, especially with how loyal they are, that makes
Yeah.
me think the problem is much worse than they're telling us. So like maybe this is just the tip of the iceberg with the shortage. Like if they already know that there's a glut in demand and nothing on the market, and there's less on trucks today than there was yesterday,
Hmm.
that this problem is only going to get worse, not better. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the first thing that comes to mind for me, because again, you're looking at like generally like 3 day shipping time from warehouse to store location, sometimes more. Well, our
Yeah.
whole country uses this just-in-time model for
Yeah.
bringing goods to the store. They don't have warehouse space within a Walmart or whatever.
Mm.
Um, and that works great as long as everything is running. But as soon as we started having hiccups during the
Yeah.
coronavirus, that's when you started seeing the issues.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like it's so interesting to me how like fragile our like entire economy is, and like one thing goes wrong and like half a million, or like half the country, millions and millions of people could starve to death, right? I mean,
Yeah.
as soon as supply lines are cut off, like what do you do? How many people actually have enough food? How many people have gardens, and of the people who do, how many have enough food to like live off of and sustain themselves just on like what they have in their backyard or whatever? It's concerning that we are in a very vulnerable place. It seems like, and America is almost like what do they call us in China? They say we're like a paper dragon.
Yeah, paper tiger or
Yeah.
paper dragons. I don't know. My Chinese not isn't so great, but I mean, this is what happens when you have cascading failure. Is every time one of these things falls apart, then you realize the other five pieces in the chain that are also weak,
Right.
and then as those fail, that causes more failure.
Yeah. Well, I think, and it's interesting too. You brought up how much the media loves Biden too, and it reminds me of that story of where he's like eating ice cream, and all the media's like, "What'd you get, Biden? What'd you get?" And he's like, "Chocolate, chocolate chip." And everyone's like, "Oh!" And they start clapping and stuff. And I'm like, "What the heck?" Like, not even the reporters in like North Korea are this loyal to Kim Jong Un. This is like a weird level of like, um, love or admiration or whatever that would be called.
Yeah, yeah, it really is almost like worship. And what's really scary is we're at this level of worship of Biden, and his polling numbers are still this bad. So just think if we had an honest press.
Yeah.
Well, I
Oh,
mean,
I know, right?
if we had an honest media, there's no way this guy would still be in office, even if somehow he had actually managed to win the election.
Yeah.
Um,
So what is and what is all this? Inflation up 11%?
these are all headlines from yesterday and today, and these are a variety of different um, key indicators that the Biden administration is just crashing and burning. And I do want to say this with inflation, chances are our actual inflation right now is somewhere between 18 and 20%. They've readjusted how it's calculated several times in the last
Whoa.
couple decades. But if you go to metrics that were more reliable, that did take things that like fuel and food prices, things like that, more into account, based on like how much people's weekly spending are, we are at nearly double what they're reporting.
Jeez,
Yeah,
that's really bad. Holy. Well, and my wallet is sure feeling the inflation. I know that for sure, and I'm sure many other people feel the same. Luckily, when you're like Biden or any of these other politicians who are giving $40 billion plus to Ukraine, you don't have to worry so much. You have everything taken care of for you, and you have all your backup food supplies
yeah.
and insurances and such. But the average American does not have any of that stuff.
No, and we're actually at a 42-year high for inflation right now, which is insane. Um,
Whoa.
so just
And
to,
it's getting worse too. It's not projected to look better from my understanding. Like things are going to continue to inflate more and more and more, especially as we continue to like print money to give to the Ukraine and other things.
yeah, exactly. Well, that's what's causing a lot of it. And then, so you have artificial inflation right now because of all the money printing, and then you also have real inflation because of the lack of goods at market. So prices go up because there's more demand than there is supply. But
Yeah.
wholesale inflation was up 11%. So that means that's what a retailer pays for an item before they put it on the shelf to sell to you. So
Whoa.
if their cost goes up by 11%, you can be sure yours is going up more than that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, things are looking bad and things seem to be getting worse and worse.
Yeah, high gas prices. Biden administration cancels new oil leases as gas prices hit record high. So,
Wow.
again, they had this kind of fake story they floated a little while back that there were 9,000 open leases that um, oil oil producing companies weren't utilizing. A lot of that was because they weren't permitting them, or other ones were
Right.
when you lease land. Yeah, it's a gamble. Sometimes you go out there, you do a study, and once you drill, you find out there isn't oil, there isn't gas, or there isn't something that you can get out of the ground and make a profit on.
Mm.
So it was conflating. But anyway, and then again, like producer prices are also up 11%. So again, that's what a factory, what it costs them to get materials and to build the product to sell. So again, that gets passed on to the store, which then gets passed on to you.
Jeez, yeah, things are not looking hot, and it's kind of like even with the with all this environmental stuff too, and I don't think for a second it actually is environmental standards that they're doing all this mitigating all this oil contracting and such for. I think what they're really doing is just trying to like screw the economy up, and they're using climate change as justification or to appease some interest group or whatever the case may be, and they do it in every single way they possibly can think of, whether it's not approving permits or whether it's allowing drilling but on land that has no oil or whatever,
Yeah.
or whether it's or any of these other things that Mike just mentioned. It's like in every step of the way the American people are being harmed. I guess that's like the theme of the show. It's like, how can the American people be harmed the most? Challenge, and Congress is like trying to speed run it or something with Biden. It's like a really difficult situation we're finding ourselves in now. And again, things get worse and worse and worse in like every single category you can think of.
Yeah, exactly. When you have food prices, especially when you have things that are unavoidable going up, like the
Yeah.
cost for your electricity, which I didn't even have that one on there. Um, but when like the cost for your electricity, your food, transportation, when all your like necessities are going up, eventually like it squeezes out to where you can't afford your rent or you can't
Yeah.
afford whatever. I saw that we're up back up to 2/3 of Americans are literally living paycheck to paycheck right now. So that
Wow.
means if these numbers continue to increase by, say, another 10% by next month, that's when you're going to start seeing people not being able to make their rent or their lights getting shut off because they have to figure out, do I eat or do I pay the electric bill?
That's insane. Yeah, and it's really upsetting that we're getting to the point in this country where like people are gonna have to start making those decisions. And like I said, like things are getting worse, not better. So don't think like, oh well, I'm safe today. Like nothing is happening today. I'm not starving today. That means I'll be fine tomorrow. Every single day, there's more and more inflation because of how the government's working right now,
Yeah.
and the likelihood of you becoming impoverished. And as crazy as that may sound, it increases like linearly every single day, and in some cases exponentially when it comes to some of the inflation rates. So don't think that you're good today so you'll be fine tomorrow. It's like the opposite. Count your blessings that today you're good, because you don't know if tomorrow things will be much harder.
Exactly. The other thing to consider is as you continue to have material shortages and supply issues and all that, if you're in the manufacturing industry or a retailer, there could be a day where all of a sudden you walk in and you don't have a job anymore
Yeah.
because the cost to produce has exceeded what they can sell an item for, or they just can't get goods and they can't justify keeping you in that retail store, so they have to reduce staff.
Yeah, and how terrible would that be as well? That you know, there's no security even in that aspect of being able to keep your job so that you can continue to pay for things, right? Even if you are living paycheck to paycheck, at least you have a paycheck. And it's these economic conditions that really lend themselves well to new political movements starting and new political parties taking control or reformations, I guess you could say, within political parties like the GOP, because people, normal average people, they have a certain breaking point. And I feel like just about everyone's breaking point is when they're like potentially going to be kicked out of their home, have the bank take it from them, not being able to put food on the table, having the water or electricity cut off of their house, not being able to pay rent. I mean, no one can go through that and not think, okay, like I was never political before, but the government has to be doing something wrong. This is totally unacceptable.
Yeah, and I think we've seen and we've accepted a lot of changes over the last 2 years because we had the excuse of COVID or other things going on that we just all went along with.
Yeah.
But I think like there are certain moments where all of a sudden you kind of see those and they really crystallize, and you kind of have that moment of clarity. So I was picking a friend of mine up from the airport yesterday. It was a late flight, so as we were driving back, once we got off the highway, I noticed that like gas stations were all closed at midnight. That all these restaurants that used to be 24 hours, McDonald's, things like that, they're all closed.
Right.
So and then I know like the Walmart by my house, like it used to be a 24-hour Walmart. It's now closed at either, I don't know, I think 10 p.m., might be 11.
Right.
And this is a huge shift. So all those jobs overnight, those are all gone now.
Yeah,
Not to
exactly.
mention your access to those. There, we have limited access now to buy things.
Yeah, yeah, and now again, now the workforce is more competitive because if you cut off half of your shift or whatever, right? And now there's like twice as many people theoretically who are looking for jobs at all these 24-hour places, right? So if you have like, four McDonald's in your town and each employ like 10 people or whatever, and then all of them cut their hours off in half or whatever because they're no longer doing night shift. Now you have like all these extra people, like whatever 20 extra people in your labor pool who now have to compete against everyone else, which lowers wages. Long story short, less people having jobs mean more people looking for jobs, which means lower wages because there's more competition.
Yeah, and I think especially towards the end of the pandemic, my background is staffing prior to getting into this full time. But anyway, we've been struggling for over a year now just to get people to work. You have a lot of people that took themselves out of the labor force because the government was very loose with paying unemployment. There were other benefits initially where they were paying people to sit at home on their butts, and people have gotten used to that lifestyle. But as our economy continues to get worse and worse and goods become more scarce, all of a sudden you are going to have people flooding back to the job market. And that's when you will see decreases in wages after we've had increases in prices,
Yeah.
and the whole problem will continue to compound then and get worse.
Wow. So I don't know. Are we heading towards like super inflation, Mike, where we're gonna see like Zimbabwe level crazy inflation? You think we're heading that direction, or do you think like who even fixes this? Like, do we have to rely on like the Fed, like the Federal Reserve, to fix this? That's what we usually do, and it usually doesn't work out great. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it does work out better than the alternative of just like what would be the alternative? Just let the economy figure itself out, or like economic or
Well,
government kind of policies to fix this? Like what's happening?
it's kind of tough. So like the Great Depression was really only the Great Depression here in the US. Most of the rest of the world didn't get so actively involved in their economy, and they bounced back within 5 years. Whereas here, we instituted an income tax that as high as 96 or 97% on higher income earners. That
Yep.
pushed a lot of business owners out of the market. We made exactly the wrong decisions then. We had all these make work programs, so people weren't going back to real jobs that were productive. Instead, they would like one person would dig a hole, the next person would plant a tree, the next person would throw dirt back onto it, and we would pay people to do these things. And some of those were useful, but I'd foresee us going down a bad path like that again, or some other using our government now will take advantage of the situation, use it as a way to implement more control. My guess is we switch over to some kind of a digital dollar to gain more access over people's bank accounts and ability to spend money, and our government's ability to tax, um,
Yeah,
because
well,
this will be the
something I
excuse.
always wondered too is like people talk about the debt all the time. This is you can clearly tell I've like never taken an econ class after I say this, but like we owe like whatever it is, $28 trillion or some absurd number like that to China. Oh, and all these other countries, right? And banks and such. But we owe all this money, but we promise them that we'll pay them US dollars. So what if we just printed $28 trillion? Now I know that causes inflation. I'm not that dumb. But then what if we just in a day trade, like go over to a new currency? So we have like the US dollar. What if we have like the US dollar number 2 and we print an equal amount of dollars now than we have, and we give everyone the new currency, so it's at the exact same exchange rate. Then we print a bunch of US dollars that we no longer use in America, and then we just give China all that worthless money to pay off the debt. Will that work or no?
Well, that's kind of what happened in Weimar Germany. They had this crushing debt after surrendering in World War One. I mean, it did kind of directly lead to the rise of Hitler, but yeah, they had this crushing debt. There was no way they could pay it, so they just started printing more and more money. It devalued their currency, and then eventually we got Mustache Man.
Right. Well, I guess we'll see what happens in the U.S. And I mean, we've been hearing, from Mustache Man to Orange Man Bad. We'll see what happens in the U.S. in the future. I feel like Trump is not nearly like reactionary enough to win an election, depending on where we're going. People think, oh, Trump was so right wing. Trump was so much of a populist, so much of a reactionary. It's like, wait till we go a little further, because think about like Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie Sanders is way more left wing than Trump is right wing, if that makes sense. Like he's further from the center than Trump is. And Bernie Sanders, there's going to be a lot, and even people like Bernie Sanders, there's people more left wing than him and more crazy than him, like AOC or Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar, right? The Squad. So we're going to get those types of people, but on the right, who are like openly saying like, yes, I love Mussolini. I love Francisco Franco. Let's do this. Let's go. And you're going to see in the U.S., I'm calling it here, those positions will become increasingly normalized, because we're running into an extremely unique situation in the U.S. that we've never been in before, with rampant inflation, as well as like massive demographic changes in the U.S., which leads to all of these political problems. So you're going to see like radical people on both sides begin to pick up more and more popularity. And if people think that Trump is radical, you guys have not seen anything yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you'll see, you mentioned radicals on both sides. We will see candidates on the left that are promising things like universal basic income,
Yep.
and other things like that that'll be very appealing to people, especially if they've been out of work and actually trying to work for a long time, can't find employment. That this solution that let daddy government take care of everything for you will be very appealing to them, especially if they don't see other solutions on the horizon.
Exactly. And that is the most important point, is that if they don't see other solutions, and the Republican Party is terrible at this, because they look at like middle class Americans getting completely, just getting the short end of the stick over and over. And they just say, well, too bad. That's the free market. Guess you should have went to college. You should have learned to code. And that's not like an appropriate response. And luckily, I think Trump had a lot to do with this. The Republican Party has started to shift a lot, at least the populists within it, to say, okay, yeah, we got to worry about the middle class, and like we can't let all this immigration in because it's hurting the middle class. People complain about the wage, or not the wage gap, the gap between like the rich and the poor, right?
Yes.
And you'll have a lot of conservative commentators, people like Ben Shapiro, be like, well, who cares if there's a gap? It only matters if you're getting more rich. But the issue with that is like, in America, because the middle class is shrinking so much and the rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming poor, it's like you can't look at the average American and be like, today the middle class is shrinking, which means you're either going to end up in the upper or the lower class in the future. Which way do you think you're going to go? If you're already struggling to make ends meet, if you're already like, what is it, 2/3 of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck, there's no
Yes.
way you're moving up towards the millionaire, billionaire class. The probability of you moving down to the lower class, where you're going to have to start saying, maybe I have to be on food stamps, maybe I need to get welfare, maybe I have to, get these tax breaks from my kids or whatever. Well, everyone takes tax breaks already, but
Yeah.
maybe I'll have to use some of these government incentives just to live. That's when people start to say, I guess I got to vote for Bernie Sanders, because I already have to live off the government. I may as well get as many goodies as I can. And the Republicans certainly aren't doing anything. They want to take away my food stamps. And I'm not saying we need food stamps or welfare or any of this stuff, but we do need programs to take care of the middle class. Because if we just say, screw you guys, we're not helping you at all, the
No.
Democrats will go and say, well, we'll help you, just vote for us.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's also the kind of the big difference from, I've said a lot of times, like, I don't mind helping somebody temporarily that needs a hand. Um, But there's a big difference between that and creating a program that is just an endless cycle like we have now, where people are on welfare, just popping out kids so they can stay on the program year after year
Yeah.
after year and not have to work. That
Yeah.
you're creating a system that can easily be abused. That ultimately, at the end, it just holds back productivity, and then robs us all as our tax dollars go to foot the bill for a bunch of leeches.
Yeah, and that's why I think the optics are very important, because so often it's not so much about like what you're saying, but more about how you're saying
Yeah.
and how you're saying it. And that's kind of the issue with the Republicans, is like they like to just point at like capitalism and be like, "Hey, capitalism." Like that's what we got to wait for to save the day. And people are like, "What?" Like, normal apolitical people are like, they know what that means or whatever, but it's like an abstract idea. They're like, so some abstract social construct that is not a real tangible thing is going to save the day. Like, I'm not buying it. Like, I want an actual solution that I can see, I can touch, I can feel, I can see it directly impacting my life every day. And that's when the Democrats come in and say, here is a welfare check. And they can take the check and cash it and go to Walmart and buy something. And they can be like, wow, I actually got something. Now, maybe in the long run, the Republicans were right. But it doesn't matter, because the way that they presented the information was so idiotic that they were just like, oh, you just got to wait, and then like the economy will fix your problems. What?
Yeah, there definitely has to be a balanced approach, especially when you're talking like, again, this is an emergency type situation that we're coming into. Like, think of it as like, a hurricane just went through and you've got no power, the city's flooded, and there's alligators swimming in your parking lot.
Right.
So you have to address the immediate problem. You have to prevent people from starving or losing their house or whatever. And then you have to have a plan in place to get the economy back on track, get people back to work and back to where they can self-support. It has to be done in a way that isn't going to introduce people into that sedentary lifestyle where
Yeah.
they become accustomed to that and aren't willing to go back to work, where they get
Exactly.
used to living off the government, i.e., living off all of our paychecks.
100%. And inflation, like I said, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So we're going to have to see something done by Republicans. And they don't have to do the whole supply side economics or demand side economics or Keynesian economics where they do work projects and stuff, but they have to do something, because if they do nothing, then people are going to look at that and be like, why would I vote for someone who does nothing? I'd rather you try and fail than just sit back and do nothing and collect your own, paycheck.
Well, just remember all this inflation and failure and all the other economic bad news right now. What that really tells us, what that reinforces the need for abortion.
Oh, of course. Democrat Rep. Katie Potter says the inflation reinforces the need for abortion.
Yeah.
Obviously, because, if you can't afford a child, you should just kill them.
Well,
Duh.
well, yeah. I mean, if you can't get baby formula right now because the FDA shut down the largest U.S. manufacturer of formula, I mean, what else are you supposed to do?
I don't know. Apparently, just murder your baby in the womb. That's the only solution. And then what? Is this another harassing a judge's house here?
Yeah, that's Amy Coney Barrett's. That's last night. They showed up for in their full costumes there. I guess the oh, what is the name of that stupid movie or series?
Handmaid's Tale or whatever.
The Handmaiden's Tale is upon
Yeah.
us.
What is the deal with that? Like, what's that movie or show or whatever about?
Uh,
Do you
I, I,
know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I just kind of roughly know that it takes place sometime in the future after a civil war where, conservative Christians won. They took over the country, and now they force women to have children. I guess there was some kind of I think it was a biological weapon that made most people infertile.
Oh,
So now they're forced to basically just have kids and wear these stupid little costumes for some reason. And the rich exploit the system, of course. They have all the basically concubines on the side. Never read the book, never seen the show, just what I've heard. So I could have some details wrong there.
wow. Well, that sounds like really stupid feminist propaganda. That's like kill your own baby. It's funny how like feminism like changes every 20 years. I've talked a lot about this, how women are so sociable, and you can see this in the differences between men and women over the course of history, where it's like, what does it mean to be a man? Be strong, be a provider, be a leader. That's what it's meant since like caveman days, and that's what it means today. It's never changed like once throughout history in any culture anywhere, right? It's like men do this, right? With maybe there's a few exceptions or whatever. But then with women, every like 10 to 20 years, they just change what it means to be a woman. Now we can't even define womanhood, but it was like women deserve the right to vote because they're smart, to then like within the same year, they were like, women shouldn't vote because that means we have to do military service, and that's no place for a woman. We don't actually want equal rights. And then it was like, oh no, women actually do want total equal rights, and we do want to serve in the military. And then it was like, oh, women are precious, and you should make men chase you. And then it's like, oh no, you should be on OnlyFans, and you should be able to do sex work and stuff. And now it's like we've come to the point where women should be killing their own babies, and you see how it just like switches back and forth. And I attribute this to the fact that women are very sociable, and it's easier to move the masses of women than move the masses of men.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it'd be easier just to say it's because they're hormonal and crazy and just make them all mad. But we'll go with, we'll give you a real answer instead.
Yeah, I was going with a more diplomatic answer
Yeah, yeah.
that wouldn't alienate half our viewers. But, yeah, but women are more sociable for whatever reason, whether it's hormones or evolution or whatever, right? And that's why you end up with situations like this where it's like, wait a minute, so murdering your own child is now feminism? Like, is that because like 20 years ago they were like, oh, you should, well, maybe not 20 years ago, but 40 years ago they were like, oh, dress nice and make a man chase you, and you have to be going to church on Sunday and be a mother and all this. And now it's kill your own baby and never get married and work a 9-to-5 job.
Yeah, yeah. It used to be have value, have self-respect, but now it's just all bets are off.
Exactly. So Handmaiden's Tale, or whatever the book is, sounds like a pretty stupid book, and it's having even stupider in real life consequences, like all these teenage girls or 20-some-year-old, actually it's probably like 40-some-year-old cat moms who will never have kids anyways, or never get pregnant anyways, who are dancing outside of all these justices' houses in their stupid little outfits.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, like I'm actually kind of surprised there haven't been any more like fire bombings or anything else of other like pro-life centers or adoption agencies or anything else. I kind of
Mm,
expected to lead with the story of however many more got burned down last night.
yeah.
But, they are trying. This is a tweet from Andy No where he forwarded looks like Rep. Steve Cox. I know this guy's out in California, where was calling for protesters to either burn down or bomb Kavanaugh's house in protest.
What a loser! Not just because of that, of course, because of that, but like if you read his bio, it says former independent candidate for Congress, California's 39th district, and it's like, so wait a minute, you're not in Congress, you're not even a candidate, you're like a former candidate who lost for Congress, who was independent. Like the Democrats didn't even want these guys. The Democrats did not even want this guy. How on earth is that something to be proud of?
Well, if you're a Democrat, failure is a resume enhancer.
And then he says, let it all burn. And I don't know what that means, if he's like an accelerationist or something. I mean, maybe, man. I would love for California to burn down. Yes, let's have the 39th California district burn to the ground. Let's go.
Yeah, I keep saying we ought to like go to the San Andreas fault line, drop, and maybe use that for missile testing or something. See if we can get the rest of it to just slide off the
Yeah,
continental shelf into
exactly.
the ocean.
Northern California is okay. It's Southern California that's not. Other than San Francisco, Sacramento, or whatever, the North is all right. It's the South that's super blue.
Yeah, well, from what I understand, like the homelessness issue now, like there's tent cities popping up everywhere. Just because again, it's gone unaddressed for so long. When you create um, a magnet for people like this to come, that's what you get.
Exactly, and people like Mr. Steve Cox here is not going to solve that problem. No, he's campaigning as a former independent congressional candidate in California. He was campaigning on raiding Justice Kavanaugh's home for some undefined reason.
Yeah, and then setting a fire in front of his hotel.
When he moves his family to a hotel, empty his house, and burn the crap in front of the hotel. Dude, this guy's psychotic. Like, the left is actually insane.
Yeah, well, exactly. Again, like if let's say the same story was reversed, and I don't know, we were gonna go burn stuff. We were protesting Sotomayor for some reason. The minute people show up, it's going to be a story. You can bet the Justice Department will actually send people out to arrest people because, again, I think we
Yeah.
covered this before. Like this is a federal crime. That intimidating a judge
Yeah.
is a federal crime. That along it was determined through several court cases that your right to free speech is um, does not supersede someone's right to a fair trial.
Right.
So
Yeah, and it's a necessary right because you see what happens in these other countries
yeah,
where you can bribe and intimidate judges, and I mean, And it's similar almost to like, I guess it's not similar, but it annoys me when people say like free speech is like being able to do like pornography or whatever. Like I've heard libertarians be like, porn is free speech, it's freedom of expression. I'm like, no, it's not. It's degenerate, gross crap that like the founding fathers like were not cool with that kind of stuff. And same with like the LGBT stuff. Like I'm pretty sure George Washington himself like voted to like put gays to death or something like that. So don't give me this whole, oh, the founding fathers were totally cool with like all this stuff. No, sodomy was illegal in every single like place, and that was not constitutionally wrong. The guys who wrote the Constitution didn't think so. Anyway, that's kind of another tangent. But I wanted to go back to that slide for a second with the guy on it, the Mr. Cox.
Yeah,
Look
yeah.
at his face. Imagine if he actually like we went to war. Imagine if we started burning each other's houses down and like breaking into each other's homes and like guns blazing, like actual civil war. It looks like Syria. How long is this guy going to survive against like any conservative?
No, I'm sure this guy's wife and his wife's boyfriend will be out there fighting for him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he'll be under the covers, like in his bed,
Yeah.
like exactly like he said, with his wife and his wife's boyfriend, like out, get off my land, and he'll be like, get rid of the money.
Yeah. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll watch your boyfriend's kids for you.
Exactly. It's painful. Anyways,
And it's probably the truth.
it's like when that Lori Blackfoot or whatever, or what was her name, Lori Lightfoot.
Well, Lori Lightfoot.
Yeah, she was like, oh, it's time to take up arms, LGBT people, and I'm like, okay, yeah, your terms are acceptable. Let's go. If you want to start a war, gay people versus straight people in the country, okay, like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. I'm ready.
Yeah, this is probably not going to end well for you guys.
Yeah.
We're gonna be fair though. We're gonna let anybody that wants to come to our side, like Dave Rubin. We're gonna let you escape the onslaught first.
Yeah, exactly. There's like a saving grace period or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, there's a Tammy Bruce. There's a few that would be
Some
that
token like gay conservatives, but you never know they're gay, right? Like Dave Rubin. I met Dave Rubin. I had no idea he was gay, even when I met him and talked to him and stuff. And I found out later, and I'm like, what? That's crazy.
Well, yeah, but I also think like that's the difference between being a gay man and a man that happens to be gay. That I think they are. If your sexuality is the most important thing about you and that's what you have to tell everybody, versus that's just something about you, but otherwise you lead a normal life like everybody else.
Yeah, right. Well, the next civil war, if it happens, will be very interesting to see. And I try not to get, I hear a lot of conservatives like, we would win no problem if there was a civil war. I'm like, well, I don't know, like there'd be a lot of countries funding against us because like we're the nationalists, we want America to be strong. The left wants America to be broken and destroyed. So like every country on earth kind of by definition has an interest in America being weak to some extent, right? At least our adversaries do. So the left is going to get a whole lot more support than the right if there was a war. But then I look at who the soldiers would be, and honestly, unless like other countries were sending like mercenaries here or something or whatever, I don't know, man. I feel like guys like this would not be able to put up a strong enough fight.
No, probably not. But like you said, I think they would be more reliant on support from China, whoever else took up arms with them. We're gonna change gears a little bit, and like I said, this is definitely not a slow news day. So we've mentioned this issue with the voting machines in New Mexico a couple times now. They've released some more documents and added to the story. So apparently these voting machines are both capable of producing their own ballots manually, and then they also had vote printers installed on the machines. So again, this says it had the ability to fill out ballots, create ballots, and sorry, I'm trying to read this. And then when we learned that today, prior to the New York State identified malicious code in the software that could do this. So it also had software installed on it that could trigger ballot generation and other things. And again, these are all things that they're supposed to be certified before an election to not have. They're supposed to be clean and not be able to be manipulated.
So this is just like further proof then that there was like undoubtedly there was election fraud. Like we can't dance around it. And I remember when I was in university still, it was right after the 2020 election. I had my professor, and he's actually an executive of some Fortune 500 company, and he was explaining, oh, there was no election fraud, and that's just a conspiracy theory and blah, 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 safest election ever. We see here that like, no, that's just made up in your head, because there is clearly, undoubtedly evidence, black and white evidence you can see on the screen now, where it's like machines are doing things they should not be doing that alter the outcome of the election.
Yeah, and again, like this is just one example of many. I mean, we've seen a lot of stuff. There's a bunch of court cases right now working their way through where this is going to become even more and more apparent. Um, and just to give you an example of that right now, if my screen will switch to the next slide, here we go. Um, Democrat county supervisor in Virginia indicted on 82 counts of voter fraud related to ballot harvesting.
Whoa.
Yeah,
82 counts. And again, people are like, oh, there's the safest election ever. Absolutely zero fraud. Nothing wrong with the election whatsoever. But then it's like, well, wait a minute. This guy's like convicted of voter fraud. And like, that's pretty severe. And like I said, there's people all over the U.S. who have been convicted of voter fraud. And again, convicted doesn't mean charged. It doesn't mean like suspicious. It doesn't mean they're under investigation. Convicted means like they've been arrested, read their Miranda rights, they go to jail, they get a court date, they get a defense attorney, like they go through the whole ringer here. And then at the end of it all, it's like, yeah, concretely judged by a jury of your peers, or you admitted it, took a plea deal, whatever, there was voter fraud.
yeah, and so 82 counts doesn't just necessarily mean 82 ballots, because this guy was convicted on 34 counts of filing false statements related to election fraud, 11 counts of absentee voting procedure violations, 11 counts of forgery, 3 counts of conspiracy to make a false statement, and there's somebody else, Sherilyn Bailey, who was also indicted. That is his aunt. And she's, again, awaiting multiple counts of false statement, election fraud, blah, 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 blah.
Because one count could be like, if you were to fill out like 100 ballots and then like send them away, that would be like one count. And then on like another day, another, different situation, you do it again, that could be another count. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm not familiar so much with law, but like the one count does not mean one ballot or whatever, or one, situation that happened, one machine. It means like one group, one set of charges, which could include a lot of different things.
Yeah, and it's kind of actually inconsistent. So you could technically be charged for each ballot, but the reality is a lot of times they are all lumped together and you get one charge. I mean, otherwise we might see this guy like, convicted of 3,400 counts of voter fraud.
Right, which would be a little silly, and I'm sure within court proceedings too, that could cause a lot of issues because every count would need to be individually assessed, I'm sure. So by this, they're like, okay, look, you sent away like 5,000 ballots or whatever, so that's like one big count of voter fraud, and it carries with it a higher weight because of how much is substantiated within it, but it's not going to be like 5,000 individual counts.
Yeah, could you imagine the judge and jury having to spend like 5 days reading every count at sentencing before convicting him?
Well, I mean, crazier things have happened in law, and that's the funny part is that, people will use, as you've talked about many times, like lawfare, they'll use the law and the courts to make our lives harder as populist, nationalist, conservatives in this country. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they used it to their own advantage as well, where they're like, oh, sorry, Your Honor, I mean, we're going to have to go through 5,000 individual ballots, and that might take a long time. Or you can let me off with a plea deal, one count of like trespassing or something totally unrelated to election fraud. You know what I mean?
Exactly. They'll charge him with jaywalking. But there's at least 1,999 more people like this that were trafficking ballots. There's 2,000 mules. They caught a lot of them, and they need to start hauling these people in and talking to them because they're going to talk. They'll break fast and they'll give somebody else that's further up the chain up to get a plea deal.
And that's the thing too. It's like, is this coordinated? Because I don't know. Like, I'm not sure how many people willy-nilly, and it would be great if I actually had some experience like with how the ballot counting process works. I would assume there's a lot of checks and balances, and your average Joe, like your average volunteer who's like, this guy looks like a soccer coach at your kid's like soccer team, little league team, right? This guy probably doesn't know the intricacies and the checks and balances that are in place. So if he needed to, do all this voter fraud stuff, he would probably need some type of advice or training or something like that. Someone directing him how to do this and how to get away with it. And, how many of these people did get away with it that we don't even know about?
Yeah, just like any other criminal conspiracy, there have to be further people, man, I can't talk right now. People further up the chain that were making decisions and organizing things. And, the way they caught these people, or part of the way they caught these people for that 2,000 Mules movie was they did a combination of getting access to video on these drop boxes, and then they used cell phone records. And I've seen a lot of stories trying to debunk this, saying, "Oh, well, these cell phone records aren't accurate enough to tell where somebody's position was, or tell if they went to DNC headquarters or Stacey Abrams' beach house or wherever."
Yeah.
But this is the same technology that they've used to identify, track, and charge a lot of the J6 protesters.
Yeah, and
So,
actually, there's even more kind of crazy news about tracking SIM cards up next, right? On the next slide here, it is
yeah,
the
sorry.
sensitivity investigation matters.
Yes.
Why don't you explain this? You know a lot more than I do on this.
So this is a story that's just starting to break now, with whistleblowers within the FBI coming forward with to Project Veritas, stating that they've been instructed to track journalists, get into their emails and other information. And again, this is probably being used to intimidate people or push them a certain direction with their stories, or maybe even just gather blackmail material, so then they're an asset of the estate, the government.
Right. And I mean, we've seen this how many times now? I mean, you mentioned with the January 6th people using like cell phones, using private data to track people, and
Yeah,
not for like legitimate reasons, not because it's like, oh, because they committed a crime and they're under investigation and they're charged, blah blah blah, with like a legitimate crime. This is like, breaching your privacy under totally unjustified grounds and
yeah.
tracking you. And this, and again, like, this is the government trying to cover its tracks. How many times have they got away with doing things like this? Just because we catch them once or twice doesn't mean that they've only done it once or twice.
Well, yeah. I mean, you go back to the Obama administration. I mean, they were intimidating journalists. Journalists. They even had people in jail, um, and they lost vast majority of those cases because again they were clearly pursuing things that were unconstitutional. But they get away with it, and then Trump gets painted like he's the worst thing to ever happen to the media. But at
Mm.
least he wasn't having people arrested and thrown in jail for reporting stories.
Yeah. And I'm just reading this again, and it says, it mentions specifically religious or domestic political organization or individuals prominent in such organizations. And again, you are seeing the active political and even now religious political persecution of people. I'm not thinking that they mean like Islamic extremists when they say religious groups. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure they mean not the 2% of America, but the 90% of America that is Christian. Although actually, it's probably lower than that at this point. But
yeah.
the overwhelming majority of America that is Christian, especially when you look at people who are religious and involved in politics, overwhelmingly Christian.
Well, there's another story that's developing that we'll probably cover this more in detail in our next show.
Yeah.
But so there was a piece of legislation passed back in the 60s called the Johnson Amendment, named for President Johnson, obviously, um, that instructed the IRS to crack down on churches that were getting involved in political activity. However, this has not really been enforced throughout the years. There is a bill that Democrats are currently trying to push through the House that will force the IRS to enforce the Johnson Amendment and crack down on churches. And you can bet this is, again, only going to go one direction.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not going to be cracking down on the synagogue who sponsors the Jewish candidate, or the Muslim who wants to, the Muslim mosque who wants to give Rashida Tlaib, or who is Ilhan Omar,
Yeah.
like a donation or whatever, or sponsor her, hold an event for her and pay her a speaking fee, whatever. This is only going to be used against Christians. They're going to be targeting evangelical churches, Catholic churches, all these, kind of more established, prominent,
Yeah.
and political religious institutions. And it really does take away our right to have freedom of religion and freedom of association. It's absolutely ridiculous to see the political persecution that is being pushed onto our churches. And churches are usually one of the, I guess it depends. It's either the first or the last to go during a large reformation, right,
Yeah.
of government. You know what I'm trying to say? Like in the Soviet Union, the very first people the Bolsheviks targeted, I guess this was in Tsarist Russia, the first people targeted were the churches. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to see, well, I wonder if that's going to be the same in America.
Yeah, because it binds the community together, and right now,
Exactly.
especially, it's people. I mean, there definitely are liberal churches. There's a lot of them, a lot more than I would have thought.
Yeah.
But it is something they know will directly impact Republicans and conservative candidates. So that's what will be targeted. They're also going to be kind of doing the same thing like during the Lois Lerner IRS scandal during the Obama years. They are going to be looking back at 501c3 corporations and other charity groups that are political and
Oh,
cracking
right.
down.
So they'll be cracking down on like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Clinton Foundation and the Open Society Foundation, George Soros's, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, we know, of course, they
Yeah.
will never go after left-wing organizations. They'll never go after the establishment. And honestly, I even think there's some more conservative-leaning institutions they're not going to target because they are complicit in what the establishment wants. And people need to stop thinking of things like left-wing and right-wing. And I always use these terms, but it really is like establishment versus anti-establishment. And then of the anti-establishment, you have like the left and the right. You can be a Republican and a Democrat and get along on 99% of issues, and then just in front of the cameras do this kind of song and dance to convince your constituents to vote for you again, right? But at the end of the day, if you're in the establishment, and you saw this with January 6th, you're in the establishment. You're going to stand up for your fellow congressman no matter what.
Yeah. Well, before we move on to our next slide, there's actually one other piece of legislation we probably ought to touch on real quick too that's working its way through that would allow the federal government to determine what is and is not hate speech, which then means that if you are someone that uses hate speech, you can be pursued as a domestic terrorist, which means no flights, no bank accounts, no none of that fun stuff. Probably take your cell phone, limit your access to the internet.
Whoa. Yeah,
Yes.
and what's really concerning to me too is if you're designated a terrorist, does that mean you can get a one-way ticket to Gitmo? Can you get put in Guantanamo Bay if you're designated as a terrorist? Because I would assume there are some like if the 9/11 hijackers, if one of them or whatever had U.S. citizenship and we caught one or whatever before it happened, whatever. I'm assuming you can send them to Guantanamo Bay, right? If they're an actual bona fide terrorist. If there's a U.S. citizen who joins ISIS and commits a terrorist attack, they are a terrorist, and I'm assuming you can treat them as such. So
Yeah.
I could. Am I? Do you know if I'm wrong about that?
That's a good question because I don't know if you could, if they were on U.S. soil, could you treat them as an unlawful enemy combatant?
I don't know. I don't know if you can say you forfeited your citizenship by committing these acts, but I would. It seems like a very reasonable thing to say when we're
Oh,
dealing with bona fide terrorists.
yeah, and it definitely seems like the argument the administration would make right
Yes,
now because,
exactly.
again,
These are not U.S. citizens. These are combatant. I don't think we're gonna have time to. Well, we can cover this one last slide, but I think we're just about out of time here.
yeah, yeah,
But I think that the establishment, of course, if you look at J6, they're gonna be like, oh, these weren't patriots, these weren't nationalists, these weren't populists, these weren't good American citizens. These were traitors. These were seditionists. These were people who were forfeiting their citizens' rights when they engaged in combat against the highest form of America, which is Congress.
yeah. Because we need to wrap up, we'll cover these last couple things here real quick. So, a separate whistleblower within the FBI. So this is a good way to look at this. We do have some people within this corrupt government agency finally starting to actually do something. I don't know why they couldn't do this 5 years ago and save us all a lot of trouble. But they did reveal information, leak some documents about the FBI being used to target school boards and parents that were standing up to CRT. They were instructed to target parents who protested CRT and COVID rules,
Whoa.
um, even though Merrick Garland claimed it never happened. And then this particular person, because she belonged to a right wing group called Moms for Liberty,
Wow.
and
And because she owned a gun.
yes, they used that as justification to get warrants, spy on her, all kinds of other fun stuff. Which again, we all know this is really just
Wow.
meant for intimidation purposes.
Yeah, that's incredible. And how many more times are we gonna? I mean, honestly, this is Moms for Liberty. This is like a group your mom is a part of, and the FBI, the State Department, the Department of Defense, they're pulling their hair out, scared, terrified because a group of moms are opposing an anti-white curriculum, which is CRT, within their schools in some like small town or whatever in Kentucky, let's say.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, why is that? There must be something to local level politics that must work because it really seems obvious that the establishment and Washington elite are terrified, absolutely terrified, and will use anything they possibly can to snuff out this action from the people.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what it is. Is they see this uprising and they want to smash it with a sledgehammer to send a message so no one else will do it.
Yeah.
So last story, then we've got to run. Uh, so days after the Biden administration unveiled that the CDC was surveilling people using cell phone data, possibly illegally, and compiling databases. Now, CDC about that said, "Oh, we were just wanted to make sure people were social distancing," which is, I'm sure, going to turn out not to be true. Well, found out they've also been cataloging tweets and other social media posts that that were vaccine related by elected officials. So here's
Whoa.
one page here just of some tweets from different reps, and honestly, I didn't even look through it. There were a bunch of them from, and this was in both directions. But anybody that was shared any kind of information on social media that was an elected representative, the CDC felt the need to catalog this, which means we
Yeah.
paid for this. We were paying someone at the CDC to go through social media posts and archive them for the CDC.
This and things are accelerating so fast. Like the surveillance state is growing so much every day,
Yeah.
and because it's in the title, we do have to cover the next slide, but it's not really talking about it. We just have to point and laugh. But the surveillance state is growing day by day, larger and larger, and they're tracking elected officials who are dissenters. They're tracking other people. Who they should be tracking is the executive at Calvin Klein who greenlit this, because oh my goodness, this is Calvin Klein hires pregnant man for new campaign. I don't really have any commentary on this. I told Mike, I'm like, I don't have anything to say about this because my jaw just drops and I'm like, what? What is this?
Oh, I know. And there's another story too that I saw today about some other like degenerate Nike ad that's up too, but I don't know if
Oh
it's
yeah.
this bad or not. Maybe it was Adidas. But just
Oh.
remember, everybody, you can move to San Francisco now and get your own pod for $800.
Well, there we go. You can live in a pod and you can eat bugs because inflation's going to kill you. Can't eat meat anymore, but you can eat little bug paste. So, with that, ending on that light note, thank you all very much for joining us here on Punching Left. We do appreciate it. We're live every Tuesday and Thursday at 7:30 Eastern, and you can find us on all other platforms at punchingleft.com. So, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. My name is AJ Wilms with Mike Lauber. Thank you, everyone. God bless and take care.
And thanks again. We'll see everybody soon.